Something that I hear a lot of confusion about when I talk to players is when to use an open stance and when to use a closed or neutral stance on your forehand. So that's what I'm going to be explaining in this video. So I'm going to give you some generalizations that should hopefully make it easier for you. If it does, it'd be awesome if you could give me a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel before, much appreciated if you could do that as well. So let's start by talking about what the differences are between the stances. We've got neutral, we've got open, we've got closed, and we could also say we've got semi-open as well, but it's just a variation of open. Now, neutral stance is the stance that most people learn when they start playing tennis. You end up getting roughly side on to the net, and as you swing through, maybe the back foot pivots around or completely pivots around. There are different variations where people can do a hop step, but neutral stance means you're going to be starting from side on. An open stance is where you're open towards the net. So now my feet are going to be set up in some kind of position like this. You could be in a semi-open stance or a completely open stance, but now we're in this sort of position, making contact there. And then a closed stance is when you're closing yourself off to the net. So now my back is kind of to the net, I'm closed off because of the position of my feet. This isn't a stance that you'll use very frequently on your forehand. On the backhand, you can hit a closed stance very frequently from a two-hander or a one-hander, but we don't tend to do it as much on the forehand. Now that you understand what the stances are, let's talk about when you'll use them, starting with the closed stance, because there's only really one time when you're going to be using the closed stance, and that's when you're on a dead run. So I've been pulled out to my backhand side, they've then taken me to the forehand side, and I am sprinting and I am hitting from a closed stance, trying to hit an outrageous winner down the line because I'm not going to be able to recover after my shot. But other than that, you won't be hitting a closed stance very often. Most of the time you're going to be hitting from a neutral stance. So I want to give you generalized rules, and they are generalized rules because there's always an exception to the rule, and the higher the level that you play at, the greater your ability and timing, the more you can kind of bend the rules. So as a generalization, neutral stance is going to be on a lower ball or when we've got more time, and an open stance is going to be on a higher ball or when we've got less time, and often when we're pushed out wide because we've got less time. So the reason that we use a neutral stance when we've got more time is, for most people, it allows them to hit with more power because it allows them to get their body weight behind and then through the ball. So they're able to step into the ball, and players generally find it easier to create power from that position. Now, obviously, a high-level player can create power from any position, which is why I said you can kind of bend the rules a little bit. But neutral stance, when it's lower and when you've got more time, including if the ball is kind of floated, it's deep, you might want to move back and then step in and hit with a neutral stance. And then the open stance is going to be when you've got less time and when the ball is higher. So when the ball is up around chest, shoulder height, it's often better to set up in an open stance or a semi-open stance, so then you can drive up into the ball. More skillful players, you saw a lot from Federer, they can really attack this high ball from a neutral stance, but I find for the vast majority of players that's a really difficult shot to execute. So we're thinking open stance on the higher balls. And then when you've got less time, so at the higher levels, a lot of the time you're going to see players on the baseline, they're going to be hitting from some variation of an open stance. So maybe a mogul step, maybe a two-legged pivot, maybe an outside hop of some type, but different variations of the open stance. Because the ball's hit with power, because it's hit deep, they've got less time. And very frequently, when you're dealing with a slightly wider ball, it's going to be an open stance hitting from a mogul step. But they're the main uses. Lower and more time neutral stance, higher and less time open stance. But obviously the big challenge here for a lot of people is effectively, quickly reading the flight of the ball so that then you can use the appropriate stance. I find a lot of adult tennis players, especially older tennis players, they're just not able to read the flight of the ball well enough, and because of that they're not able to use the appropriate stance. And the reason they can't read the flight of the ball well enough is because their visual system doesn't work well enough. People spend their whole lives sitting down looking at screens, the systems start to down-regulate, and then you try and play tennis and the requirements are just tremendously high in tennis. The good news though is that you can actually train and improve improve your vision, and by doing that it can help you to read the flight of the ball more quickly and help you set up in better positions for your shots. So I've created a free class that's going to teach you more about that. I'll place a link to the free class down in the description if you would like to check that out. If you have any questions about what I've talked about here, about the implementation or different types of shots and when to use these stances, obviously leave me a comment down below. I normally try and get back to people as quickly as I can. Hopefully you have enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you next time.